Hi, everybody.
Oh, yes.
Hey,
Hi.
Omar.
How are you?
Welcome to Design and Dialogue with my special guest, Omar Sosa, today. As many of you may know, Omar is one of the founders of Apartamento magazine. I guess it's been described as a kind of styled Bible for a new generation, something like that. He founded Apartamento in 2008 with his co-founders Nacho Alegre and Marco Velarde. Marco and Nacho aren't here with us today, but we have Omar a bit in captivity for about an hour.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure. It's a nice captivity.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know that you agree, like myself, that we're spending way too much time on Zoom, and I think you were just talking about how we should be watching the birds in Mexico, which sounds fantastic. Wish we could be doing that instead.
I
Right?
wish you. That's what I was thinking. But that's pretty good too.
That's pretty good. Omar, I'm really happy to have you here today because, as you know, Design and Dialogue is a bit of a record of an archive of how we're all, as creative people in and around the design world, dealing with, the current situation. And of course, for most of us, it's a bit of an interiors reawakening, right? We're all of a sudden confronted with how we live, who we live with, people we may not have been used to seeing 8 hours a day. Now we have to see, even if they're family. And in a sense, the home itself is being redefined. What I find fantastic about Apartamento, and honestly, it's one of my favorite magazines. I hope you don't mind, but sometimes we keep it in the bathroom.
It's a format for the bathroom. I think it's the right room for it.
But all of that said, I think Apartamento and you here on Design and Dialogue, it's a great forum to talk about the reinvention of the home and this idea of what we could call radical living. So I'm really curious before we get into what is radical living and looking at some examples from Apartamento. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your origin story or how you started the magazine with your friends.
All right, so I'm gonna put my presentation. To make that long story short, we started Apartamento in 2008. It was out of, we never wanted to do a magazine, to be honest. Like, we were all working for other magazines, like me as a graphic designer, and Nacho and Marco like as a photographer or editors. So we were coming from that world, but we knew it wasn't that fantastic world that magazines maybe were back in the 70s or maybe 80s. So we knew it was hard work, very little money, and it wasn't that fantastic. But nevertheless, we were really, since very, very young, I guess, very interested in how other people lived, and we found that there was sort of a gap there, and we couldn't find the magazine that satisfied us, especially because everything looked a little bit too aspirational, it was too retouched. We didn't feel the reality was actually shown on interior magazines. So
if we look back to that moment, right, it's kind of the height of glossiness, where every fashion magazine was adopting let's say home sections and lifestyle sections in the magazine, and everything was so, I guess, posed and what Apartamento brought was like a breath of fresh air because you were dealing with real life, real people living in the way that they live.
Well, we also found that's true, and what we realized for fashion or for culture magazines, there was a wider spectrum of styles and magazines. Like Index magazine was already dealing with much more real, just the style. I think like just the photography of Index was maybe because it was like a post-punk sort of magazine, and it was that style was there, but for interiors, it was absolutely nothing explored. So since we were coming from that field, it was natural for us to say, they just put something out in a printed format and make it. However, it wasn't clear how to do it and what to do, but we put together some stories. We call our friends living abroad. We were very obsessed of making a magazine that was as international as possible. Nacho and I are both from Barcelona, Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Marcus from Milan, Italy, and for us was very important that was a window to the world and not something local, because that was still a moment where magazines were pretty local. I mean, New York is big enough to have local magazines, but when you're talking about a magazine about Milan or Barcelona, it's a pretty small community, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then we can talk about that later, but the idea of building up a global international community, it's something that probably is the most satisfying thing that we have achieved over the.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess in a lot of ways, your community often comes to bear on the magazine, right? I mean, you're known for having a pretty fabulous list of friends, including Natalie de Pesquier, including the late Jim Wolrod, for example. So
right.
People with very, very interesting, deep connections in the design and art world that I think in some way contribute to the culture of the magazine as well.
Well, I think something that people appreciated, it's sort of like low brow like approach to interiors and design, and we sometimes are classified as a design magazine. I don't know. I mean, I work, I guess, in the design world. Like our clients are like design companies, but I don't know what design anymore, and I don't really know if we fit there. I want to say that we fit into the everyday life, and we try to portray as many diversity as possible, which is something that we have to say that we work very hard, and we still don't do a good job. I mean, we still know that we have to be way more diverse in many things. But we keep trying, and that probably is what keeps the fire of like keep doing the magazine after so many years. So here, I mean, just to go with the images, this was issue 1. It was launched in 2008. We had a small idea of what we wanted to do, but we went with our gut. I mean, we didn't do any market research. There was no business plan. We just felt that we wanted something radical, something that we wanted to buy. So we launched the magazine with this very messy cover, like just like this corner of an apartment, just full of magazines, and you can't say too much of what it is. And then I guess we were immediately known for being the messy magazine, like the antidote to tidiness, and which was sort of true in some cases.
So wait, I mean, you mentioned that you wanted to start this as a radical magazine, and so there's that use of the word radical, and a little bit about our talk today is going to be how we define radical. So Omar, tell me how you define radical.
So I mean, my definition of radical would be you take one idea to the extent and you stick to it, and you know that that's your goal. You're like you try to keep it as pure as possible. That to me, it's like the definition of radical. That translates to living into some of the examples that we're going to see later. But when it comes to a magazine, for us was to stick to one idea, to stick to our principles, not to sell out. I mean, these last 10 years, they haven't been easy sometimes in terms of financials. We started the magazine just when the economic crisis just started. So it was for anybody, it was like a really, really bad idea to start a printed magazine. Yeah. Also at the same time, the first iPhone came out. So it's just like, why doing a printed magazine? It was probably not a smart idea, but we wanted to stick with that, and we wanted to not sell out, meaning that we never accepted money as an exchange for product placement or for a
Let's
story or for nothing like that.
let's talk about the digital for a second, I mean, there's a couple of things I want to say. I tend to think of radical as somehow subversive and somehow having a kind of political intent and definitely going against what's considered traditional, right? And so when we connect that to radical design, as we will, I think that the question for me is, are these interiors political in some way, right? And was that decision that you made to not go digital but to make a printed magazine in some way, you know, a radical statement in itself?
It was definitely, I mean, I think it was a combination of different reasons. The first one was our natural, we used to make printed magazines and that was our field. So it was natural to do paper. We wanted it, we liked it more.
Right.
The second reason was we knew or we sensed it because it was already like that 12 years ago, that it was going to be an overwhelming quantity of free content online. And we wanted to give value of what we were doing. So we wanted this idea of like, you buy this, you have an object, you have something that you also keep, you store, and you can collect. And that's something that Apartamento since the very beginning has been designed as an object that you want to keep, and something that also starting from the format, from the paper, the quality that is made, and I want to think that people will use it as a reference for the future.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
why I'm just moving a little bit farther to slides.
Yeah.
Here.
I'm wondering. Oh, please go back to the covers.
Yeah. So this is. So this is the last 12 years on covers, and I mean, essentially what I wanted to say here is like we started very messy, but that was our state of mind. I mean, second issue was a squat house in London, but then we had everything here, like rich, poor, people living in cities, people living in total isolation in the middle of nowhere, illustration, paintings. Like we wanted. I mean, it depends on really our state of mind or mood at the moment.
Well, but that brings up the question of how you choose your interiors, right? I'm really curious how do you come across these people and what decisions are being made about who gets in the magazine?
Well, that's the $1 million question, which is hard. It's hard to answer. It's we like after all these years, we have a very sort of silent agreement between our my partners. That also includes Robbie Whitehead, that he's our editor now, and he's been working for the magazine for also 14 years. And it's almost like we have some sort of rules that they are not written, and it's more of a feeling. Sometimes we make mistakes. We don't publish something that should have been published, and then we regret. Some other times we publish something that we say maybe this wasn't necessary, but most of the time, I would say in 80% of the cases, we all feel that's the right thing, and it's very, very hard to explain why. We try to feature people that are not overexposed, especially in the beginning. That was like a non-written rule again.
Right.
We try to feature people that you may know their work, but they are not too over, seen everywhere. So we would rarely feature like a singer that just, just release a new album and it's going to be on all.
I mean, even if, in a sense, even if we know who they are and they may be celebrities or whatever, we have no idea how they live, right? I mean, and
that's true. That's totally true. But for me, and I guess for my partners too, part of the joy of making the magazines, like, I don't know 70% of the people that we feature on each issue before we start researching. Like my culture is coming from knowing about these people that are not obvious names most of the time. I mean, and we want to keep that balance between you would say, what's the recipe for a successful magazine, right? Or what it used to be. Just put someone famous on the cover, blah, blah, blah.
No,
We sort of went the other direction in a way.
We have enough of that. Let's go a little bit deeper into one of these issues, please.
Okay, well, I just wanted to present the latest cover. It's going to be out in a few weeks, and we chose Willie Smith on the cover. It's a very interesting story, and I also want to think that it's a part of what the Cooper Hewitt, like the exhibition at Cooper Hewitt, like that was just the first day of the pandemic, was here, like they couldn't do the opening that it deserved. Alexandra Cunningham Cameron, and she did a great job curating this. And we found out that there were a lot of pictures of Willie's apartment at Lispenard Street.
Just to clarify for everybody listening, Willie Smith of the 80s fashion brand Willie Wear. Is that right? That's who we're talking about.
That's correct, yeah. And there's still, the show is still, I think it's still on view at the Cooper Hewitt. So yeah, that's our current cover. This, we saw it. And then one thing connecting with the idea of collection, it's that, and this is maybe comes too much from me being a graphic designer, but I realized that nobody was really paying attention to the spines. And oftentimes it's the only thing that you see.
Yeah.
So going with this idea of collecting, of like growing a collection, we started doing decorated patterned spines since issue 4. We like to collaborate with different artists. So we had from, Lawrence Wiener to Nicholas Party making spines for us. We know it's a very complicated format that, artists don't love, because it's just, what can you fit in those, in that small space. But as I was saying, this comes for the idea of having a magazine that will hopefully, last for a long time. You will keep it and use it as a reference.
I mean, I'm assuming you were also a magazine collector like me. I remember the day that my studio flooded and all of my Domus magazines were destroyed.
Oh no, that must have been terrible.
Domus was, they were so heavy and it was such a burden, but I was so in love with going back and looking at those issues. And it kind
of must have been painful.
But
then, but at the same time, maybe that was liberating, because the weight of paper, it's really crazy sometimes. And for me, I moved countries now 3 times in the last 5 years, and it's you don't know what to do with all that paper. It comes like, you make it follow you, like all your magazines and books.
Tell me about it. You're looking at a view of my library here. This is just part of it. in horizontal format in this shelf that I made. But your space looks fairly empty.
It is, site only, empty apartment in Rome.
I love that. Like, site only.
It was a pretty radical space to live.
Yeah, exactly. So on your 10th anniversary, you published your first. Is this your first book, The World of Apartamento?
Yeah. So yeah, that's correct. We were asked several times, like previous years, to make a compilation of the magazine, and it's something that we never really felt like doing, because we would rather publish a new issue than to make a compilation of all the magazines. But it seemed like for the 10th anniversary it seemed to be the right time to do it. So we published this book with Abrams in New York, and it's somehow the opposite of Apartamento in a way. It's big format, hardcover, and instead of having context, this is pretty decontextualized. And let me explain this a little bit. I believe like now we live in a world of no context. Like we see images everywhere. We sort of connect them with one another, but there is barely any context. Magazines used to be, or books, were the places where you study deep into, subject matter, and a lot. But now with social media, Pinterest, Instagram, you see one image. If you're lucky, there's going to be a caption, but that's it.
I mean,
Um,
it is kind of about slowing down the image and going deeper into not just how people live, but what they live with and how they've collected things over time. I mean, this is to me the beauty of the interviews that are also part of the magazine,
exactly.
because you reveal a lot of the story behind the people. And one of the great joys for me as a designer is getting to see how people live with objects. I mean, you make something, it goes out into the world, and you never see it again outside of, maybe the way a magazine might style it. But to see how real people live with objects, I think is incredibly fascinating.
Well, it's been like, I think this been like since ever, like humanity, like always this the curiosity to know how somebody lives, and but how do they really live? I mean, for Apartamento, we like before shooting, we had all sorts of different cases. Like some people have thrown a party the day before because they wanted the house to be messy, like the magazine style, and it's just okay, that's your choice. Or people that have cleaned it, like like to the like have like just put everything perfect.
Are you somehow afraid of this idea of apartamento style? I mean, does this become problematic at a certain point when people want to adopt what you're doing as editorial content as somehow a way of living, as if it's prescriptive, right? As if you're telling people how to live.
Well,
But
that's a very interesting thing because we somehow wanted to be prescriptive. We understand and we know that many magazines are about the actual prescription. Like you buy, and I don't want to say names, the certain magazine, and you sort of adopt that lifestyle. They tell you what watch to wear, which cities are more livable in the world, and what furniture to have, etc., etc. And that's totally valid to me, and because it's like that's how magazines used to be. We wanted to take the opposite way of just showing many different ways of seeing life, and then you come up with your own way of living it.
yeah, I mean, it's
So
funny because I think Apartamento is all about the alternative way of living, not a particular way of living. So, shall we continue and look at some of the more radical ways of living that you've used
yeah,
over the years?
so I wanted to put a question mark on radical living, and that's a conversation that we actually start having the other day. Some of the apartments that we're gonna see here, it's up to people to say how radical they are, and probably the owners must say they're not that radical. It's the way they chose to live. So for
Sure.
them, it's not radical. It's like just that's how I live. For most of these people, having like a 3-bedroom apartment in the city would be the most radical thing in the world because they can't fit into that way of living. So I want to always keep that question mark of what is radical and what is not. However, all of these apartments are they live to a to extend to like not to extend, like how can I find the right word? They lived in like they're very pure in the way that they see they want to live,
Hmm.
and I think that makes them radical in a way.
I
So
mean, for me, this idea of radical living is somehow a reflection of the personality of the people, right? And so it's more about who they are and what they do and how they bring that home with them, right? Or how their home revolves around their way of life. And I mean, this in a lot of ways, right? We could think about this as radical because for most people they have a job, they go to work, they they're really separated from their home life most of the time, and so this is why I think this question is so interesting at this particular moment in time. And Andrea Zattel is a great, an amazing artist, old artist friend of mine from, the 90s, believe it or not.
Wow.
I remember when she was living in Williamsburg, and she took over, she was kind of one of the first artists to buy a house in Williamsburg and make it a kind of artistic project. It's where she, I think, first began expressing her own utopian way of living, right?
Right.
She was growing chickens in the back.
Yeah, I mean, she was making all these like one module, like sort of house experiments where you can,
right.
wash, like like sleep, cook, and everything in, like, I don't know, it was like 1 square feet, something like that, like something really small.
Exactly.
I mean, I put her first because that's an artist living, like living in her own art, I would say, but also a life choice. I mean, living in the middle of nowhere in Joshua Tree, just having miles and miles of desert around you, living in quite like almost total isolation. It's a choice. It's radical for some people, but we had Andrea writing a very beautiful text for us during the pandemic with the quarantine, and it was especially relevant that in a moment where people were spending time by themselves. I mean, maybe wall to wall with their neighbors, but in a mental isolation, or not in a mental isolation, but in a quite in a real isolation, because they didn't have contact with other humans. So that her radical way of living sort of became the norm for a while.
So how long has she been living out at Joshua Tree in this kind of in her own, what does she call it? Her A to Z.
Yeah, AC ranch.
Yeah.
I don't know how long. I think it's like about 10 years on and off. And then I know she had some issues with like building these cabins and allowing people to sleep there, like some sort of regulations, like she had to do some changes. But I really don't know enough to talk about that. But well, I mean, these kind of like capsules where you can spend a night. I think it's a very interesting also experiment of like radical way of living, even if you're just spending a night there. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty radical way of understanding interiors and living.
Yeah, I mean, this is for me probably the closest to that that whole 70s Italian radical design sort of proposition, right? That she has created her own statement around not just the interior, but the home itself, and the home becoming furniture, in a sense. And this is, I mean, I don't know if you see it this way, but I think this is quite a political statement. And
it totally is. Also, the idea of a house as a tool or as a machine, as an artifact. I think it's very interesting. Like, something detached from actual like real estate of land. Like in a similar way, this reminds me of Donna Judd wanted to go to the farthest place in the U.S. and just living in sort of isolation as well. And
it also becomes a beautiful backdrop for her work, right? I mean, when you look at this image, obviously you can see her installations, let's call it her artistic practice at work, but you also see the kind of infinite beauty of nature. So, and I love this this continuing like life as an artistic project question.
It's definitely very, very, very interesting. So going to the next one, going to Sao Paulo in Brazil, there is the architect Eduardo Longo that we featured many issues ago, and this is living in an utopic architecture idea. I mean, there was like very quite common in the 70s to live in domes, or to create like this idea of like spheres that could be inhabitable, and he built one for himself and in the middle of the city.
And is this on the rooftop? It looks like it's on his rooftop.
It's on the rooftop of another building. That's correct. But all this is the house, the whole sphere. And then of course everything is custom made. So it's almost living in a boat where, like from bathroom to the kitchen, like everything it's custom made and built in for this sphere. It would like I love the little details of the chairs with like the little covers for not scratching
So
the
has he designed everything here in the house? So this is like a total work of art also.
it's a total work of art. I mean, this is the typical example of somebody doing it by himself over the decades and then keeping it in quite a good state until today. This was shot maybe 6-7 years ago. So, it's probably like,
I don't have the impression that he has a family or that
well,
it's quite sterile somehow.
I don't remember the story right now, but I think he actually had a family. And I mean, I'm going to explain another similar story later with a family involved, which is because some of this, when you adopt a radical way of living, then you're confronted with the realities of, and now I have kids, and they probably not that happy of living in a sphere that it's weird to go up and down. It has like maybe clear staircase and all of that. So how people cope with that, I think it's very interesting, and in some cases make it even more radical. I mean, I have friends living in houses that are completely not suited for children, but there's everyone's alive and it's fine, and
Yeah, and I mean, in fact, children adapt quite well. The question for me, though, is do you think that this is a kind of, similar to Andres Hotel, do you think this is a kind of artistic retreat that is in response to the standard way of life, that essentially he's saying, we prefer to kind of to eschew this kind of normal box in a tower sort of thing and make our own, almost like a birdhouse or a tree house.
I think it comes from, especially from the case of Eduardo, from a very deep need of originality, like living in something unique. And I think it's very interesting when people take it to the extent of like being their own houses, the place that is the expression of their art or like vision of the world. Because it's also very interesting, and we have all these cases very often in Apartamento where a very incredible radical artist lives in the most normal house.
Yeah.
And that to me is radical too. I didn't want to include those cases in this presentation because they may seem a little bit like, okay, the house is normal. And that happens to us very often. Like, oh, this is a house. Okay, fine. Doesn't even have furniture,
So that gets a little bit into your process. I mean, if somehow you're meeting the person and you're thinking that they would have, an amazing place to live, but then you arrive and maybe it's quite normal, as you're saying. So can you talk a little bit about that, like the process of identifying a potential subject and then visiting their home for the first time and documenting, etc. Maybe as we move on.
Right. So, I mean, our process is it's more about finding the right person, not the right interior. But we are lucky, and then it's like an incredible house with an incredible person. It's bingo, But if we are interested in a person, we really don't care about if the apartment is normal, not normal, radical, like more beautiful, less. What we think it's important, and that's in our hand, is to choose the right photographer and to choose the right interviewer. And thanks to this community of people that we work with, it's possible. And because I mean, I'm here now giving this talk, but it's not only I have partners and people working for the magazine in our studio, but there's this huge number of contributors that they actually make the magazine, and they're the ones that most of the time come up with ideas and say, guys, I have this story for you. I think this person is relevant for this and that. And then we trust them. I mean, it's very organic in the way we do it. So when you say, how do you choose interiors? It's not only trusting me or Mark or Nacho or Robbie, it's trusting many other people. Like when Jim Wardrod was alive, we would never doubt of any story he would come up with. It's like, I want to do Richard Hurley. Just, yes, of course. Just,
So
let's
then, I mean, in some ways, do you consider the occupants of the homes also as contributors or collaborators, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it also happens somebody we feature becomes a contributor and then interviews somebody else for the next issue.
Right.
It's a very organic way of working, and even the way we put the magazine together, it has to work. And if a story doesn't work for that issue, it's going to be for the next one. And we're very sorry for the contributors that they work fast to make it on time, but it doesn't work.
So Omar, can you give us a sense of what who else, what other homes we're going to see? Who else are we looking for?
Okay, so I wanted to show. I thought Peter McGough, who was known as like a couple with David McDermott back in the 80s. I mean, they were known for living in this sort of like time capsules. Like their work, everything they would do was made with the means and everything as it was back then. I mean, Peter just released a book like a year or 2 years ago, and it's very interesting to read like how, when he was in the 80s, he was living in the East Village, but his apartment was completely stripped down to the bare bones, and then they would recover it as it was originally. So they were riding horses. They had a 4T with like wooden wheels, for so long until they had an accident.
What?
And everywhere they live, they live in that year, and then nothing they have, it's more modern than that.
Incredible.
You know what I mean? So now Peter lives in a small tenement house in the West Village, and I think it's a 1910 house, and everything that you see there, it's not more modern than that. Everything, I mean, including clothes and everything. I think that way of living, it's pretty radical, but it comes natural to Peter because it's a way of like, I'm this apartment. It was made that year. Everything gonna have here is gonna be that. So it's actually the choices are very obvious. He's not gonna have something modern.
He's kind of a performance artist in a sense, right?
It's a total performance. Like you can argue that it's like Andrea. It's like they're living in their own art, and so you see here there is a collage of pictures that we published in the magazine, where you can see different interiors that Peter and David lived in over the years. I mean, they used to own this bank in Williamsburg. It's just after the bridge. There's this massive bank there. They used to have that, and then everything they had inside was like back then. They would use like a old camera. They would do cyanotypes. They would wear these clothes. It was pretty radical, but he still lived that way. And so these are more images of the house, like you see, like kitchen. I mean, probably this blender is a little bit more modern, but I'm sure it's not like very, very modern. It's almost funny to see Peter just to hold his cell phone. It's like, what is that thing?
What's interesting about this is that obviously there's a kind of moment in everyone's life where they peak, let's say, where they kind of arrive at who they are symbolically and maybe not intellectually, but at least socially, and that particular moment, it's often the case you visit older people and they're kind of stuck in that space of time where they were at their best and everything that they're kind of surrounded by. So in a lot of ways you could see this as nostalgic, but at the same time it is very natural as well. So I get what you mean about that. We should probably move on a bit faster, Omar, because I know we have a lot more to look.
But that was an interesting point. So going to a younger person, like Maria Prats is an artist living in Barcelona. She didn't want to decide between living in an apartment or having a studio. So she rented this massive like warehouse in the outskirts of the city. And then she wanted to live there, but since it gets cold in Barcelona, even if people doesn't think so. She built this shack. It's made out of cardboard. It's like a real shack,
This is
where she has this stove, and then like this is
wait,
like a wood burner and
this
a
is a
bathtub.
house. Sorry, this is a house within a house, in a sense.
This is a warehouse, a pretty big warehouse that gets pretty cold, and then she built this house within the house, made of cardboard, as you can see. And this is the interior. There's just a bed. It's a bed, a bathtub, and this fire burner. That's it. That's as simple as it gets. And then the inside is her studio. She makes her art there, big installations, paintings, etc. And then she has this little space where she can sleep, and it's quite comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, she's very punk in a way of living. She lives there. She's very happy. I mean, sometimes now she was telling me like she spends some days in the week with her girlfriend in a proper apartment, and then she comes here for the weekends because they feel like they have more space and they can do more things. And she was also talking about how great it was to have a place like that during the lockdown, because it felt like it was like much more space, and she could be in this little shack but also be working at the same time. You didn't have to leave the apartment.
Yeah, it's almost like an urban condition, right? Where she's made her own building within a much bigger kind of landscape. And this idea of the artist is the pioneer, right? Is even though it's radical in a sense, it's also traditional, right? The artist goes out and finds space wherever they can, and then kind of reinvents living around them. So.
Well, it's typical in a way because it's freedom versus money, and why paying two rents if you can just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
More, I think it's political in a way as well.
That's
and
right.
That's why many artists, they just decide to live in places like that, and then you give up maybe certain comforts for the like the beauty of doing what you want and not having to be constrained by timings or clients or all that sort of stuff. So another very radical, to me, this is one of the most radical, and maybe I can't find the word, but it's almost a little bit not obscure. Like, I'll find the word later. Fernando Guerras was an architect living in Madrid. So he lived with his family in, I think it's this house where you can see in this picture, until he divorced, and then he dug a big hole in his garden and made this house inside.
Wow.
And all what you have is this crazy. So that up there is the garden of his family, where his ex-wife lives, and everything is normal. Basically, he buried himself in the garden.
This is incredible.
And he was doing all sorts of parties and everything, where, like, to the irritation of his ex-wife, like saying, like, where is this woman coming? Where is these people coming to our garden? And then going down to this hole that he dug in the garden. He called it the hell scrapper, instead of being like like being the opposite of a skyscraper. But what it really shocked me also is, like, it's quite obscure maybe, and as an idea, but the place, it's so beautiful. And like this picture, every time I see this, it's just like, wow. I mean, you wanna live there. It's like beautiful place, like there's harmony. I mean, there is these beautiful soroyas here with the plants that are coming up from the garden. I mean, or down from the garden, which is probably like getting destroyed.
Well, for me, I mean, what's most fascinating is the quality of light. You wouldn't expect this kind of glow, and it's almost like looking into the vault of a museum or something, right? Where he's kind of living in his own history as well. But I love the fact that he didn't move away. He sort of said, "Hey, I'm also part of this family. This is also my property," and he created a new way of sharing with his ex-wife, which is like, wow, that is Maybe what year was this constructed? Do you know, Arm?
In 70s.
70s.
That was 70s, late 70s, early 80s. I mean, there is a story that he tells. Actually, he was dead, so somebody was telling in his behalf how his kids were so angry at him that once they threw the Christmas gifts to these windows and then they broke and they just came inside, and that's how they showed the anger of their parent living in the in a hole in the garden. But quite interesting way of living, or understanding sharing. Another quite obvious case for me, it's performer and artist Kembra Fowler, living in New York City. She basically painted the whole apartment, including every object, in the same red, which is the red that you see in many buildings in New York. It's like the paint they use for the facades.
Wow. So it looks like almost like a brick red, right?
It's a brick red, but pretty much everything is also painted on that, and then she just applies a layer every time that it's dirty or there is something new.
But you have to talk about these. You have to talk about these two images here a bit, Omar. What are we looking at?
I can talk, like the one on the right. She mentions that when she's stressed out, she just hangs herself upside down from this cross as a way of relaxing. Don't know if that's true. And this gigantic penis, I don't know what it's doing there, but it's I guess, I don't know, next to the kitchen. It's quite interesting. And yeah, everything else. It's also what I really like about color, and I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of how color transform spaces, right? And people oftentimes they don't really pay attention to color, and you spend time and money on like features in a house, but if you just apply a color, the thing, like the space changes radically, and it costs you nothing, basically, just like the paint, right? And how this, like being involved in this color, it's like it completely transforms the space in a very radical way, and also makes all the things much more visible.
Yeah, this is what I was going to say, is that for me, it's a fantastic backdrop. Everything that isn't that color is highlighted in some way. So yeah, brought to the foreground. It's fascinating. It's as if her entire apartment is a kind of painting, and she's dealing with this figure ground, right, compositionally. Every time she opens her closet, I suppose.
Totally. I mean, it's just everything that is not painted red. It's there. It's interesting. I mean, my friend's architect just finished a house for me in Barcelona. It's a little apartment, but so somehow against my will, everything is gray, and I like color, and that was not really my thing. But the architect insisted, and I was like, okay, let's leave it as an experiment. And it's very interesting to be in a gray box, how all of a sudden all the colors become so precious. So I'm personally very interested in colors and interiors, because it's something that most of the time it's like not really, it's very overlooked, and it makes a huge impact. And it's very interesting. People are very afraid of color. Like, oh, a red room is gonna make me crazy, or a yellow one is just gonna go. It's not true sometimes.
No, it goes, for me, it goes back to this idea of the digital. I was speaking earlier with my son about this, about how, for our generation, objects were a means of transporting us, right? Collecting objects was a way to kind of travel to other places and to understand other cultures. And for them, right, it's all digital. And so, to imagine that this, you create a backdrop for your objects, right? We could also read it like this, is that they all exist against this kind of field, right? So reducing the context of the space and allowing the objects to live independently.
Totally. I mean, for so many people that, and so many cases in Apartamento, the houses have become a container for their objects. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where it is. When this translates into digital, it's different. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I see people that it's more nomadic now because you carry that on your, on the cloud, let's say. But we've seen that there's more and more interest for interiors and for, people to live in more, like the more curated houses, maybe because now they're also more visible. I always say that that's probably one of the reasons, because now you can show your house as before you used to show your sneakers.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you don't need to go out, you show it on your video calls, or like people just, there's actually more people coming into your house lately than maybe ever before in history, because you take pictures, you allow them. It's like there's more open than ever, especially to strangers. So
Now we have to reconsider how we dress, quote unquote, the home, right? Because it's almost like how we dress ourselves.
totally. I mean, during the lockdown, I started collecting screen grabs from my Zoom calls, just because I'm quite fascinated to see how. I mean, of course, I love how people live, and that's the whole point behind doing this magazine. But now, being able to see it from your clients, friends, and contributors, and having all these calls and seeing how people, also the choice of some people that just they would choose to show their kitchen as a background, and you say like that's a quite interesting choice, because it's like it's almost like your clothes, it's what people are going to see, and it's your image.
Well,
But
I
anyway,
often wonder if they're even conscious of what's behind them, right? I mean, some people, and we have to admit this, is that not everyone is conscious of the aesthetics around them to the degree that someone like you are, right? Of course, for them, the Zoom call is just a functional transmission of information. So they're not even thinking about what's behind, or what's being revealed about them as they allow you in. So let's continue, Omar.
totally. So an example we talked before, which is also a question mark of like how radical it is Vince Aletti. I mean, what can I say of Vince? I mean, he's a writer among many other things, but he's first and foremost a magazine collector, and an incredible expert on photography. I mean, I think he probably knows more than any other person I know in the world.
Thank
And
you for including Vince, because this is I was really looking forward to seeing this.
I mean, Vince's place is incredible. There's also places where they have a special aura, and this has it. And there is something I like to say, which is I don't like to go to the apartments before we publish the magazine, because it kind of breaks the spell a little bit, and also because I want to be able to put out a story from the view of the reader.
Yeah.
Once you go to a real space, it's a different feeling.
Yeah.
And it also happens that sometimes you get disappointed by either the pictures or by the actual place.
Yeah, I can imagine if the pictures didn't do it justice, what would you do?
I get very mad to see like, oh no, I've been to that place and this is much better than what you see in pictures. But I want to respect, or we want, I mean, I talk in behalf of my colleagues too, we want to respect the point of view of the photographer. And, if that's what the photographer captured because that was his or her interest, that's good. I mean, sometimes we reshoot. We do that very often. We reshoot 2 and even 3 times if we think it's not right. But I think it's important to respect also the as you say, the sensibility. Like some people will be obsessed by showing something in particular. Some other will be completely, they won't even notice that. So, and I think that's how humans are, and that's also important.
Well, please take us into Vince's place.
Okay, so Vince lives, basically, it's like a magazine hoarder. I mean, everywhere, every inch of that apartment has a stack of magazines or books or both, and many, many pictures of men. And that's it. I mean, you go to any room and it's full of magazines. And I mean, this is his living room. There is enough space to walk to a little table. But I have to say, like unlike many very busy apartments, this is clean, it's perfect. There is no, it's just like a perfect, it's like very, it's very livable. But it's just very crazy to be with like this amount of magazines. And he also knows pretty much where everything is.
Well, that was my next question. How is he as a librarian? Can he actually find his own material?
He would say he struggles finding things, but I was surprised how fast he can say, oh, this stack of magazines from, you know, this House and Garden are like, and he, you know, he shows you the whole stack. And it's incredible. How do you access to a magazine that it's on the third pile on the bottom? I mean, it's just like it's a half an hour operation.
Yeah, a good friend of mine told me that he actually has every single copy of Vogue from every edition around the world. Is that true?
I wouldn't be surprised. It's a museum, and I hope someone will take care of this forever, because it's a lifelong collection. I think nobody has these, and it's worth being kept together. I mean,
Omar, I think we only have time for one more.
so let's go to the next one. I think we're almost finishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have Sam. Where else we have here? I think I'm gonna, if we have only one, I'm gonna skip Sam. I mean, it's a very interesting
Amazing.
place, because it's quite radical in the way he's using. I mean, Sam is an architect, but in the way he's using the space, I think it's very interesting. I mean, not to mention this triangular bed, but also here you can see the same furniture in two different places, and how everything is decomposed and kind of adapts to the place. And I think it's very interesting. He says that all these furniture are like if they were, you know, like animals kind of thing. Like they have their own life, and then they, you know, they're separated. They don't have to be all constrained by to being part of one thing.
I mean, only looking at it quickly, you have the impression that the kitchen itself could be moved around even, right?
Exactly. I mean, this like it could be moved. It's actually from a practical point of view, it makes a lot of sense sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You just have things moving around you, except like many times you see, I get very mad at see like a kitchen layouts and they're completely, they don't make any sense. This is just freedom at its like extent, you know, and it's also very interesting to look at. If we have time for one more, I want to show Richard Hell.
Yeah, please. I mean, I hope everyone can stay a bit longer because I'd love to have questions. So please,
Okay,
Omar.
so I'm going to go very, very quickly. I mean, this is to me is a quintessential. Richard Hell is it's a singer. He had this band called the Voidoids in the 70s, and he's been living here since 72, I think. And I would say he hasn't changed a light bulb. I mean, this is like to me the quintessential punk apartment. It's like complete disregard for material things, and you know things are broken because you know they're old, and you know like there is mold because there's been water, and you know that's how it is. I think it's quite incredible and he's lived here with his wife, and that bed is it's very, I mean, I think it's a very beautiful picture. So this was Jim Warren interviewed him yeah,
He's, I mean, Richard Hell is one of the early inventors of punk, I suppose, punk music in New York, right?
He's probably could be called like the inventor of punk, and this is one of the cases where subject and it's exactly what you expect, but to the you know to the most radical extent. It's like he lives in the really punk, like as he moved there when he was 20 something, which I find it completely amazing.
Incredible.
So yeah, I think we should leave it here.
Absolutely, Omar. Thank you so much for
thank you.
Incredible tour of Apartamento. We will open it up for questions now to the chat. Let me see. I'm just having a look here. We have one question from Anais. I'm not sure if Anais is with us. but maybe she would like to ask directly. Anais, are you there?
Yes. Hi, thank you very much for the lecture. So yeah, the question is about identity. And I was wondering what you think about it with your magazine, and did you feel ever trapped with the graphic line you choose to take with it? Because we can see that you kind of follow it since the beginning, since the first one. So yeah, thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you,
Interesting.
Nate. I mean, it's a good question because it's something we discussed many times, but maybe one of the reasons is because myself coming as from a graphic design background, I didn't want to make a magazine that it was about graphics and trying out new typefaces and changing the layout and everything. I wanted it to be almost like a invisible background, and instead we wanted to put the energy on the contents. And then that was how the magazine started off, right? Like it was just very simple design, almost just purely informative, a format that it was easy to read, easy to carry on, also easy, like cheaper to print. And then we thought, why changing these? And um, if it could be a classic, like I love seeing, for example, National Geographic that has evolved but has never radically changed. I mean, with some exceptions of like maybe in the 90s or 2000s where everything becomes a little bit more like digitalized and not really, but like it had changed quite just very little over more than 100 years. So we like to think of Apartamento in a similar way. Like it's a repetition that keeps always changing and evolving, but slowly. And I think also as an opposition to the digital world, I think it's rewarding and nice sometimes to go back to something that you kind of know.
Mm-hmm.
It's familiar, but it's different in a way. And I'm saying that, but I also thinking maybe you are just lazy and you just should change everything and just embrace, like a real change.
Well,
But
clearly it's a big task, I guess, to put out a magazine regularly, and so for me, it's quite nice to have that familiarity, but know that the content inside is changing. Thank you, Anais. Alex is wondering if you can give us a tease about the books coming up, and I believe we had an image, we had a slide that we didn't show. Would you like to go back to that?
So yeah, I'm happy to go back to this. How can I? Okay, I'm gonna present this again. Share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, I'm gonna go very quickly to the story. So since we started publishing more and more books, I think the last 5-6 years. Why? Because the magazine only comes out twice a year, so there is all this time where we say like we wanna say more things. We want to explore more stories, but not necessarily overload people with more magazines. So we started making books. The books I'm going to show here are books that already exist. So this is a series that we did on different architects living in their own houses, or sort of. Like, I mean, it's not like this is not like Schindler living in his own house, but like it kind of suits the series. And they all have to do with interiors. Like there's one of Arquitectura G, which is this studio in Barcelona. It's only images of the apartments that they did with barely no words. Then Dominique Nabokov, she's an amazing photographer living in New York, and this is the third book of the trilogy of New York living rooms and Paris living rooms. I recommend to find those on eBay. They're still like quite cheap and they're amazing books. So we were very happy to do the third book. And then with Sam Chermayev, we just published a book called Creatures, which is his philosophy on objects becoming like this part of your life. And as we were showing in the presentation. And then I don't know if I can say, I guess I can say, like the upcoming books are more cookbooks, which it's something we love doing. And it's different from interiors, but kind of complements it. So there's going to be a new cookbook coming up soon. And also we are preparing a book about the houses of this small town in the north of Catalonia called Cadaqués. It's
Oh yeah, of course.
it's a beautiful place where modernists, like people in the 50s and 60s, started building out beautiful houses. People from all over the world, not only Spanish or Catalan, but mostly Catalan. And nobody has ever published a book about a compilation of all those houses. Most of them they don't exist anymore. So
Of
we're
course,
coming up with a new
Caracas
book about that.
yeah, Caracas is famous for the Dali house, right?
So
South
Caracas is where Dali used to live. He used to live in a little port, which is like 5 minutes from there, and it's a beautiful, like very tiny fisherman town in the north of Spain. And but the example of architecture there, it's really really interesting. So we're hoping to have that book ready before the end of this year.
Well, hey,
And
great
also,
question, Alex.
we also publishing 3 books with Friedman Benda
Oh.
on three different designers, and I just don't want to say much more, but that's
No. I mean,
they're gonna be great.
We could keep going.
Yeah. I don't want to say much.
Listen, we have to continue this conversation privately, Omar.
Okay.
I've really enjoyed having
It
you.
was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you everybody for joining us. Please tune in next Wednesday when my co-host Glenn Adamson will be back with British designer Paul Coxage. Once again, thank you, Omar. Thank you, Apartamento.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.